Well, thank you, Daniel, and welcome to Energy Week. Thanks again to our amazing Scott Institute staff for putting on this really wonderful event, and thank you to all of you for being here. I am so excited about the great work that the Scott Institute and the Carnegie Mellon is doing to deliver energy and climate solutions here. Really, these are the technologies, as Daniel was saying, technologies, systems, and policies. Carnegie Mellon does all of it, basically from lab to driveway, or lab to fab. And what we're doing here is going to tackle the climate crisis and also make energy affordable, clean, reliable, and resilient. So here at the Scott Institute, we are the university-wide energy institute at Carnegie Mellon, spanning all of our colleges. We have more than 160 faculty affiliates from all the parts of campus and really all parts of our global campus as well. So what do? We give out seed funding. We give out genius grants to our faculty who are trying to create something new in the world. And these grow into bigger energy projects or into companies. We also create and accelerate the type of climate and energy research initiatives on campus and bring folks together from computer science and the humanities or engineering and architecture or business and policy. We also create the energy community here on campus and in the region. And so we host events like this, like Energy Week, to bring people together to spark new ideas. And we support founders and innovative startups in climate and energy, and that's our theme for Investor Day today. So that's why I'm honored to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Lisa Hansmann. Lisa is the director at Foundry Logic and has held multiple roles in economic policy, first working on Senator Elizabeth Warren's policy team and in the Biden White House and the National Economic Council, and then as special assistant to the president and senior advisor in the chief of staff's office, driving implementation of the administration's Investing in America agenda. Lisa's research has focused on the intersection of clean energy and industrial strategy, most recently at MIT as senior advisor to innovation fellow Brian Deese. She holds a JD from Yale Law School and a BA from Yale. But really, one of the reasons I'm excited to introduce her and have her here at Energy Week to kick things off, because Lisa understands the intersection of business, policy, innovation, and clean energy. At the White House, I was very lucky and fortunate to get to learn from her as a colleague, and now I'm very lucky to call her my friend. Please welcome to the stage Lisa Hansmann.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. So we're going to first start out by testing the clicker. Success? Amazing. Costa, thank you so much to you and to the whole CMU team for having me. It is wonderful to be here today with this group of folks. And maybe just to help get a feel for who's in the room today. Quick show of hands, who would identify themselves as an investor? Okay. What about an innovator? Broadly defined. And someone working in another part of the energy ecosystem. Okay, so we're very well represented. And I will just say that as a history major whose science credit in college was something called an issues approach to biology, I'm very cowed by the technical talent around me here today. Costa gave a very kind introduction, but since my path to energy investing has been somewhat idiosyncratic, I thought I'd give you just a bit of background on how I ended up here. So broadly, I've spent the past couple of years working at the intersection of economic policy and energy. As Costa mentioned, I started out with Senator Warren back in 2019, and there my work focused largely on questions of market structure and competition, which I'll come back to today. When I joined the White House at the National Economic Council, I thought I was going to keep on working on those issues, but then inconveniently, Russia invaded Ukraine, oil and gas prices went crazy, and all of a sudden, I ended up spending the bulk of my time working on stabilizing energy markets in the wake of that invasion. And after the Inflation Reduction Act passed, I moved over to the Chief of Staff's office to implement what, as Costa noted, we called the Investing in America agenda, really the trio of economic legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, that were intended to translate public dollars into tangible economic infrastructure in the sectors that matter most for the 21st century. Our approach broadly to industrial strategy was that it should be public sector enabled, but private sector led. That is, leveraging tax credits and grants to crowd in private capital from the folks in this room too. And when I left the White House, I went to MIT to study whether that was actually working. How is it that the private markets were responding to public incentives? And quickly what I discovered was that it would be much more interesting to actually be a part of determining the answer to that question than studying it. So I joined a deep tech venture capital firm called Engine Ventures to work on how it is that we actually scale breakthroughs in science and engineering from the lab to commercial impact, working on and with lots of CMU innovators as well. Across these experiences, one reality has consistently struck me: the profound challenge of ramping up the supply side of our energy economy, and how this challenge is only becoming more acute as the makeup of our economy and our geopolitics shift. So just last month, I joined two former White House colleagues to launch a new venture called Foundry Logic, focused on deploying patient capital to address that very problem. How is it that we scale businesses that can unlock America's capacity to build in sectors facing major structural demand tailwinds, but where legacy business models have failed to deliver, energy chief among them? So what I want to spend some time talking about today is the inflection point that we're at in our energy outlook. For nearly 20 years, U.S. electricity demand has basically been flat. Through a combination of outsourcing of heavy industry and efficiency gains, we managed to grow our economy without using much more power. That era is very clearly over. We now face a structural surge in energy demand driven by electrification, AI, and a resurgence of domestic manufacturing. But what strikes me is that the irony here is that despite this being fundamentally a supply-side challenge, our biggest bottleneck isn't technology innovation. We excel at that thanks to folks here at CMU broadly and universities and labs around the country. Rather, the challenge we face is around outdated market structures and misaligned business models. Put simply, across the energy ecosystem, we have a market that doesn't pay for performance. Utilities earn regulated returns regardless of efficiency. Permitting consultants bill by the hour. Construction firms are held harmless from cost overruns. The system rewards delay rather than delivery. To truly unlock our supply-side potential, we have to match the technological innovation that we see in the lab with equally bold innovation with how we structure and finance a set of enabling businesses, the businesses that build. And fixing this structural mismatch is going to be key to transforming breakthroughs in technology into infrastructure at the speed and scale that the current moment demands. So let's start by actually situating ourselves in the current moment. I think it's quite clear that we're living in a moment of unprecedented uncertainty from an economic standpoint. If you look at mentions of uncertainty in the Fed's Beige Book, which is basically a report that the Fed puts together by sending out a bunch of researchers into the field and asking people like those of us in this room, how do you feel about the economy? What do you think? You'll see that the latest Beige Book report includes a record number of mentions of that word. More than after 9/11, more than after the 2008 financial crisis, more than the start of COVID-19. But beneath this uncertainty, a couple fundamental truths are reshaping our energy landscape. First, we're experiencing a moment of global economic regime change that is driving onshoring of core aspects of our economy, and with it, the need to power them. It used to be that we assumed that global integration of the economy would continue on a smooth path, greater and tighter and more aligned. But over the last decade, that's been upended. The impact of the China shock on local economies, like those around us here, made clear that we couldn't just outsource our means of production without harm. The supply chain vulnerabilities that COVID laid bare showed the importance of maintaining at least some domestic productive capacity in strategic sectors. And as a new set of technologies with the potential to reshape the economy emerge, from quantum to biotech, a new era of great power competition, with China chief among it, is driving increased protectionism around those technologies as well. These dynamics together are driving a new economic posture at home and abroad. Since 2020, the number of protectionist trade measures globally has tripled. And we think about tariffs top of mind these days, but it's far from being the only new tool that we are deploying. We're also using strategic reserves to stabilize prices, tax incentives designed to bolster domestic production. And all of this is, in fact, already driving a surge in construction investment to onshore production across supply chains, semiconductors and clean energy especially. New factories are breaking ground, and these factories are built different, to put it lightly. They are high-tech and they are energy intensive. So for one example, TSMC's new fab in Arizona will require, once it's up and running, the equivalent of the peak output of an AP1000 nuclear reactor. One factory. So the bottom line is, the effort to rebuild American industry is underway. It is energy intensive, and it is ramping up quickly. On top of that, the inputs into our economy's production functions are fundamentally changing. Two main drivers at play here: digitalization and electrification. You've already heard projections about AI's energy usage if you're in this room, so I won't waste too much breath rehashing them. But I do think it's important to remember that for all of the time we spend arguing about how much data centers will drive demand over the next decade, they're projected to be only a fifth of total load growth by 2035. So even if we get radically more efficient data centers modeled off of human neurons and powered by a hamburger, we are going to need more electricity. So the chart behind me is pretty confusing. It shows the drivers of electricity demand broken out by color and by time. And roughly, probably from the back of the room, it looks like a rainbow. That, I think, is really the only point you need to take away from this, which is the diversity of drivers of electricity demand over time mean that we are not facing a single factor challenge, but rather a structural shift in our energy needs. So all in all, we're shifting to an economy that runs on electrons, and the impact here is hard to overstate. It involves a reversal of the past 3 decades' monotonic decline in energy intensity of GDP. These are not whipsawing trends. They are tectonic shifts that have been underway for a while now. I raise them not because they are novel, but because at a time when everything feels like it's in flux, it's important to remember that certain aspects of the direction of play are quite clear. These forces, onshoring electrification, are creating structural demand tailwinds for electricity and energy broadly, unlike anything we've seen in decades. National electricity demand is going to grow more than 15% in the next 5 years and by as much as 50% by 2040. And yet, the supply side is totally jammed. Even though last year we added record capacity to the grid, more than 90% of it clean, we're still scraping the bottom of the barrel relative to projections for what energy deployment should be around the time of the IRA's passage. This is due, in part, to our failure to build out the grid, a topic that I know is near and dear to CMU's heart and to mine as well. So the trend line on transmission growth, as you can pretty clearly see here, is moving in the wrong direction. Last year, we built roughly 55 miles of new high voltage transmission, which in a nation with 700,000 miles of grid is effectively a rounding error. So all told, the mismatch between the US's growing power needs and our capacity to meet them has never been clearer. Why is it so hard to scale the capacity? It's funny because, as this group knows, when we talk about the structural surge in electricity demand, even aggressive forecasts of 2% of annual growth would not be a very attractive CAGR for most of us investing in one sector or another. In fact, even looking historically, it's a fraction of what we've seen in previous periods. And to me, this chart from Rhodium is just always one of the starkest reminders of that. And yet, the energy sector as a whole has been caught totally flat-footed. Why? For a problem that is primarily supply side, again, it is striking how much this is a factor not of technology, but of market structures and business models. That is a deeply abstract statement, so I think it's helpful to illustrate with an example or two. And nuclear, I think, is the case in point. The economic and geopolitical motivations of scaling nuclear energy are obvious and compelling. Its 24/7 capacity profile and the power density of its footprint make it well matched to the needs of growing industrial and computing load. And with seeming light speed, the politics of nuclear in America have shifted. Democrats and Republicans are both cheerleading the development of nuclear. Secretary Wright just announced a reissuance of $900 million in grants for SMRs. Major tech companies have announced capacity investments in nuclear equivalent to power New York City multiple times over. And this is a prime area where the US actually leads in technology, at least on paper. We pioneered the AP1000, we've got the most advanced reactor designs, some of them even licensed. And yet, despite all of the enthusiasm, translating this technological prowess into action has proven extraordinarily difficult. Our nuclear projects routinely run years behind schedule and billions over budget. And despite having the most advanced technology in the world, warp speed for nuclear deployment here is 10 to 15 years, slower than any other developed nation. So the most popular explanation for this frankly disastrous track record is regulation. As with all simple explanations, there is important truth here. Our nuclear regulatory system is designed to eliminate even hypothetical risks at any cost rather than to advance progress safely. And some requirements seem totally at odds with this current state of technological progress. For instance, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires the gathering of 2 years of meteorological data from a specific site, which effectively requires building purpose-built towers on a site and standing there and waiting for them to collect meteorological data for 2 years. Now, this is a requirement that makes less and less sense when you start to think about how widespread weather data is and that you and I could just pull out our phones, although hopefully not now, and pull up a panoply of weather data for any point in the world. So it's become in vogue to claim that if we only simplified the regulatory regime, we'd be able to build new nuclear at scale. I would bet that there are some Ezra Klein listeners in this crowd. And for those of you who have been paying attention to the abundance discourse, sometimes it feels like it boils down to this too. Fix the regulation and you fix the problem. Again, important truth here, but as with all simple explanations to hard problems, this too feels incomplete. One indicative data point is that we currently have 18 gigawatts of already permitted nuclear projects sitting dormant. So approvals alone cannot be the issue. The deeper issue, I think, lies in nuclear's capital costs and the construction timelines that drive them. And here's where I think a look at business models at play is useful. If you're going to build a nuclear plant, you need someone to pay for the project. You need someone to build the project. You need someone to give you all the parts to put it together. At core, across each of these elements, we do not have a market structure that pays for performance. About 80% of nuclear's overnight costs are linked to engineering, procurement, and construction, or EPC broadly. The EPC firms that get paid to turn designs into infrastructure get paid on a cost-plus basis, meaning they get paid for their costs plus a fee. Now, that gives no incentive to keep construction or equipment costs down. These types of contracts shift all the risk to consumers. So if things go wrong, the project just gets more expensive instead of the firm finding another way to build it. So what about the consumers? Why don't they say something? Well, utilities, who have historically been nuclear's main consumers, get paid a fixed share of capital expenditures, rate of return. So they don't have much of an incentive to keep costs down either. So predictably, the costs and the timelines of building nuclear projects in the US have surged. And cost overruns for nuclear are higher than just about any other mega project, so you can see behind me here. Take Vogtle, our first new nuclear project in decades. Much of the construction was done on the kind of payment schedule we just talked about. And as a result, it took 17 years to complete at twice its original budget. So, all told, building nuclear has effectively ground to a halt due to the cost problem. And to me, this is really a microcosm of our challenge to build big things here in America. This is a place where people point to technology as the solution. If we deploy new reactor designs that enable the mass manufacture of nuclear plants, costs will decrease. Taken in isolation, that is factually true. But the reality is, without addressing the systems and services that actually build those plants, SMRs will fall prey to the same challenges and cost padding from design to build project. Then this isn't just about nuclear. These market failures and broken incentives abound in energy, and they matter, I think, especially to a group like the one here today, because they keep us from capturing the full transformative impact of technological advances in clean energy. Take solar and storage, the champions of cost declines in clean energy. The cost of solar panels and batteries have fallen by 70 to 80% over the past decade. And yet, delivered electricity prices are increasing. A big part of this is because utilities are spending more and more on the cost of actually delivering that power. That is not a technological mandate. We have grid-enhancing technologies, many of them developed here at CMU, that utilities could adopt now. Super cheap solutions like dynamic line ratings that basically use math to increase the amount of capacity that you can run through existing lines at the cost of a software subscription. These technologies are the closest thing that we have to a $20 bill lying on the ground. And yet, utilities have no incentive to bend down and pick up that $20 bill. And as a result, they're spending more on transmission and paradoxically building less. Again, this is not a system that pays for performance. Or to pick another well-known issue, let's talk about permitting. Timelines to permit projects have swelled. We've undoubtedly all tracked that, due in no small part to the environmental reviews involved in assessing areas where projects are going to get built. Yes, this is, of course, tied to our regulatory infrastructure, but we have incredible technology that can help us conduct these assessments more efficiently, built on the back of leaps in geospatial intelligence and satellite. Take Transect. They're a new kind of environmental review company that can do siting analysis in minutes rather than months and effectively look at all of the endangered species in any given area and give you an answer of what exact environmental risks there are. The problem is, the consultancies that typically provide these services don't actually have any incentive to adopt speedy solutions. That's because they typically bill by the hour, which, as someone who is married to a lawyer, I feel confident I can tell you does not incentivize anyone to work much faster. So, if you put it all together, misaligned utility incentives, cost plus contracting, hourly billing, siloed expertise, the whole energy services ecosystem, the way we plan, permit, finance, and execute projects has not modernized to match our energy ambitions. So things get built more slowly, more expensively, or not at all. And the secondary result is an atrophying workforce and supply chains left untouched. There's a big piece in Bloomberg all about how this has happened in the transformer space today. And transformer prices are now up 70% over the past couple years, and wait times are stretching into the 4-year mark. It's not that we lack technology or bold innovations. It's that our structures and incentives for deploying them are misaligned with the task at hand. When compared to the breakthrough technologies that those in this room develop, it's like having a Formula One race car, but no pit crew to service it. 21st century technology, but 20th century market structures. Unless we can come up with new business models that can actually win within those structures, the full beneficial impact of technological innovation will not be felt. So, where do we go from here? Here, I want to go back to the structural forces that we talked about at the beginning. I think that those forces are shifting the energy sector in a way that creates opportunities for disruptive new business models. Couple reasons. First, against the backdrop of inflation, which has obviously become the most important political issue, there is going to be a real political refusal to accept higher rates. And that is going to force utilities to consider backing different, more competitive models. Look no further than PJM in our backyard. Last year, their capacity auction showed a 10-fold increase in clearing prices, which would lead to a projected 10% bump in residential prices. Governor Shapiro brought a lawsuit against PJM. PJM is delaying their auction while they figure out some solution that doesn't saddle ratepayers with billions. Again, the outcome is not clear, but the concern is. Similarly, as load growth surges and reliability becomes even more of a concern, utilities and companies alike are going to push for structural changes that unblock logjams to adding capacity. One recent data point just from last week here, this may have gone under the radar, but the FERC Commissioner Rosner sent a letter to the CEOs of regional transmission organizations, basically advertising a range of interconnection automation software services that are available to them. This is a very strange thing for a FERC commissioner to do. It is strange to send a letter to the CEOs listing out a menu of software solutions. To me, it suggests that pressure here is undoubtedly going to increase. And third, the emergence of a new set of private sector payers who are far more price conscious is putting pressure on the energy ecosystem as well. We talk a lot about hyperscalers, but they aren't the only ones who are looking for behind-the-meter solutions. As interconnection queues remain long and electricity prices surge, more and more commercial and industrial players are looking to procure their own energy sources. They aren't going to stand for the status quo and will demand more competitive outcomes. So against this shifting backdrop, the companies that win are those that will adapt to and innovate within the market structure. What would some of these new business models look like? We're building the plane while we fly it, but a couple examples that come to mind. One is moving from cost-plus contracting that rewards bloat and delay to models that actually share risk and reward across builders. A new set of companies like the nuclear company, like Blue Energy, are experimenting with new ways and consortia that allocate both the risk and upside of huge projects like nuclear builds across stakeholders, including EPCs. So if you're a builder, you have skin in the game for an early and efficient completion of a project. We can think about reinventing how we do environmental review to offer end-to-end project development support for a success fee, getting rid of hourly rates and long consultative processes. That way, firms actually have incentives to take advantage of the incredible tools and geospatial data that allow you to evaluate sites much more quickly. And given the grid bottleneck, there's a niche for companies that help to navigate or even bypass the queue logjam. I think the acquisition of CMU's own Pearl Street last week suggests that this is an area of growing attention. Here, to me, the trick is really whether you're able to bridge incentives across developers and utilities. Maybe it's third-party solutions providers who come in and expand grid capacity as cheaply as they can, putting down the cost themselves, say by leveraging grid enhancing technologies, and get a share of future power sales. There's also room for, I think, a new category of firms that help corporates navigate this changing energy landscape. So companies that never cared about their energy consumption profile much before now need to care from a cost perspective and a geopolitical perspective, and are navigating a wider than ever set of technological options. If we think back 2 decades, making wind and solar project financeable required a new kind of data and price intelligence that companies like BNEF and Veris built. There's a real opportunity now for companies that are doing that work for a new set of emerging climate technologies. And then there's how we actually maintain and service those technologies going forward, especially if we're slow to expand grid capacity. A lot of the new generation that we see will be distributed. including across commercial and industrial locations. This requires a huge scaling of upkeep and maintenance services. We've seen companies like Qmerit innovate to create national workforces to service electrification, but we're going to need to do the same for the surge in solar and storage in particular that we expect to be deployed over the next decade. So in each of these areas, there is a common thread. Business model innovation is doing the heavy lifting to solve structural problems in a manner that lets us get the most out of technology. Now, given that it is, in fact, Investor Day, we should talk a little bit about how you actually finance all of this. If we're going to go and grow new kinds of companies, we also need new approaches to financing them. Many of the types of businesses I just talked about, services businesses that frankly are relatively unsexy, aren't a good fit for traditional venture capital. Some of them will be built on the foundations of existing companies that have been serving the energy sector forever. By pairing that deep-seated trust and expertise and relationships with the innovation and technology and business model delivery that we've been talking about. Private equity is usually the source of capital that established businesses have to turn to. But the traditional private equity model that expects a flip in 3 to 5 years doesn't lend itself to the kind of sustainable, durable growth and expansion in productive capacity that building a platform like that actually entails. Nor does it let you actually capture the upside, the compounding returns that you can see from building a business capable of benefiting from the decadal demand tailwinds that we're talking about. In fact, if you do kind of a forensic look at private equity funds winners, who tend to be sold from fund to fund to fund, you'll see that both the fund and the founders would have done better had they been able to hold on to the firm for longer. So a patient, long-term capital model that lets you reinvest in these businesses and capture the huge TAMs in the energy transition is, I think, worth exploring. And there's opportunity for evolving the financial models here too. So I know we've covered substantial ground here, but when you take a step back, I think there's an opportunity to reimagine what an energy company is in this era. Not just those that generate or sell electrons, but those that enable the use of those electrons, even within broken market structures. So one useful analogy that I find here is to think of blue jeans, Levi's specifically. I didn't know this story until a little while ago, but it has really struck with me. In the 1850s, as we all know, hundreds of thousands of people moved to California hoping to strike gold. A 24-year-old German immigrant named Levi Strauss, that fellow over there, also moved to California. He went after a different opportunity. He didn't dig for gold, but he saw that miners needed actual durable workwear that could stand up to the stress of the new activity. So he started selling denim and he built an empire on it. One that, while built on adjacency to a relatively ephemeral gold rush, ultimately outlasted the rush itself. Now, as I noted, I think the energy transition is anything but ephemeral. In fact, I think it is likely to be the largest capital formation event of our lifetime, though AI may be giving it a run for its money. But I like this example because it shows the opportunities that emerge across an entire innovation ecosystem when people are forced to come together to do new things in new ways. And to me, that's why events and gatherings like this one are critically important, because it's where engineers, economists, investors, environmentalists can actually talk about what works and what they need, who has risks where, how you balance them, so that we can build more and faster. And so I'm really grateful to be here, and I look forward to having those conversations with you. Thank you.
Oh. Yeah. So we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience, and in true CMU Energy Week tradition, we would like to ask if a student would like to ask the first question. Going once, All right. Open to the whole audience for any questions you may have.
Check, check. I noticed that batteries were the biggest investment in one of your charts. Is that because the big bottleneck is actually like 4 p.m. on a hot day? And so if you have the batteries, you kind of can solve for the ceiling instead of just building a bunch more generators?
So I think that the chart you're talking about is one showing investments in clean energy manufacturing in the US. And batteries are far and away the biggest driver of that. And that's because in the wake of I interpret it as being because in the wake of the Inflation Reduction Act, which set up significant incentives for battery manufacturing in the US through the creation of the 45X production tax credit and support on the demand side through the EV tax credit, all of a sudden there was tremendous demand for domestically produced batteries. And so we've seen that surge happen. Now, I think there's an open question about whether that manufacturing in particular stays here as the fate of the EV tax credit is in question, but so far we've seen its durability. I think you're also bringing up an important question about why we think that storage will continue to be deployed in the future, and I think it's a combination of things. I think, A, it's providing the firming capacity that you talked about, and there's been a bunch of incredible work recently showing how combinations of solar and storage can meet the high capacity factor needs of large loads like data centers. But it's also, I think, because storage is a good solution to the types of grid bottlenecks that we talked about as well, where if you are a commercial or industrial player who has a resilience need, storage is a deployable solution in your backyard. So yeah, I would expect that to continue as well, which is why I think we need to be looking one step ahead and thinking about how is it that we actually maintain and service storage solutions, in particular as the underlying technologies continue to evolve quite rapidly, and what's the right model that lets us do that.
Thank you. Very great presentation. I really appreciated the depth of the challenges here on the supply side. I was really struck, though, on your one slide where you showed the drivers on the supply side. You called it your rainbow slide. One of the things you didn't really mention there was like the offsets to the supply drivers, like energy efficiency. That bar was much bigger than the drivers. Could you talk some about what assumptions are sort of built into energy efficiency and how that might be part of the solution?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting moment because energy efficiency had somewhat gone out of vogue a couple years ago, but now I think precisely because of the cost pressures involved with rising electricity prices, we are seeing a return to efficiency, not from a climate standpoint, but from a cost standpoint. And so I think those solutions are critically important. I think the broader belief underpinning a lot of this is that even if we are able to find efficiency solutions, the scale of economic activity that is returning to the US, due in no small part to shifting geopolitical realignments, is going to create a net increased need regardless. And so these are two things that will have to exist in tandem. And I think when we talk about new business models, thinking about ESCOs and how they are able to efficiently deliver energy efficiency solutions to commercial and industrial players in particular is another critical piece of the problem.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Great presentation. What do you see as the key regulatory or policy changes that need to be made at the federal level to facilitate this transformation?
I think it's abundantly clear that we need permitting reform. And in fact, that was an assumption that was in many ways embedded into the passage of the IRA, that after the IRA passed, we would go back and do permitting reform. And yet the political coalition around that did not actually deliver. That said, I think that this is one of the few areas of bipartisan interest and one where we will see change at the federal level. The open question in my mind, though, is in a world where state and local restrictions also play a really significant role in project execution, what can we do to address those local vehicles for opposition as well? Some of them are formal and some of them are informal community level opposition that even if not leveraging, a particular ordinance can still delay projects. And I think that that is a communications challenge for us as much as it is a regulatory one.
Wonderful. Thank you for your questions, and thank you, Lisa, for a great keynote. Please join me in giving Lisa a round of applause.